Start of Chapter 9. It was said, O Messenger of Allah, pray to Allah against the tribe of Taif of Taif. He said, O Allah, guide Taif and bring them to us. The Prophet had routed the enemy at Hunayn and driven him from Autas. He now decided to give Malik bin Auf no time to recover his breath and organize further resistance. Consequently, he sent the captives and the flocks taken at Autas with an escort to Jirana to be kept under guard until the return of the army. And the very next day he set out for Taif, where major resistance was to be encountered. But he moved cautiously, for after the unpleasant experience of the ambush at Hunayn, he had no intention of letting the army walk into another trap. The country now was hilly, consisting of steep ridges rising up to the plateau on which stood Taif, and in this terrain a wily commander like Malik could lay an ambush almost anywhere. Leaving Autas, the Prophet marched through the Nakhla valley and then turned south into the Wadi-ul-Muleh. From this valley he crossed into the Wadi-ul-Qarn, and following this wadi, reached a plateau 7 miles northwest of Taif. So far the Muslims had encountered no opposition, and scouts had reported no sign of the Taif outside Taif, but hoping to surprise Malik, the Prophet shifted his axis. Cutting across the difficult terrain north of Taif, he got to the less hilly region lying east of the town, between Nikhb and Sadaira. From here he marched to Taif, coming in from the rear. Throughout this march, Khalid again led the army with the Bani Sulaim as advance guard. But Malik bin Auf, in spite of his lack of years, was not a man to be caught unawares. Having suffered grievously in his clash with the Muslims at Hunayn and Autas, he was determined not to accept battle with the Muslims again in the open. He would fight them on his own terms. Consequently, he kept his army within the walled city of Taif and speedily stocked it with sufficient provisions to withstand a long siege. Here the Taif, under their brave young general, awaited the arrival of the Muslims. The Muslims got to Taif on February 5, 630, the 15th of Shawwal, 8 Hijri, and started a siege which was to last 18 days. On arrival at Taif, the camp was set up too close to the wall of the town, and this mistake was punished by the Taif archers, who showered the camp with arrows. A few Muslims were killed before the camp was moved away and established in the area where the Mosque of Ibn Abbas stands today. Groups of Muslims were now deployed around the fort to prevent entry and escape, and Abu Bakr was made responsible for the siege operations. Most of the time, fighting between the two armies consisted of exchanges of archery. The Muslims would close up to the town and try to pick off the Taif archers on the wall, but the Taif had the odds in their favor, as they had some cover in the open. So the Muslims got the worst of these engagements, and many of them were wounded, including Abdullah, son of Abu Bakr, who later died of his wounds. Thus some days passed. After the fall of Makkah, the Prophet had sent 2 Muslims to Jurash in the Yemen to learn all about siege warfare. These 2 men did not, however, return till after the siege of Taif, and thus could play no part in the siege. But Salman the Persian again came to the help of the Muslims, as he had done in the Battle of the Ditch. As a Persian, he knew something about more sophisticated forms of warfare. Under his instructions, the Muslims constructed a catapult and used it to hurl stones into the town. But the Muslims were amateurs at this business, and the catapult produced no significant effect. Salman next decided to use a testudo. A testudo was a large shield, usually made of wood or leather, under which a group of assailants could advance to the gate of the fort, safe from enemy missiles, and either crash through the gate with a battering ram or set fire to it. Under the instructions of Salman, the Muslims constructed a testudo of cowhide, and a group of them advanced under its protection to set fire to the wooden gate of Taif. As they got to the gate, however, Malik and his men poured red-hot scraps of iron onto the testudo. These pieces burnt the testudo and terrified those under it, so that they hurriedly dropped the unfamiliar equipment and ran back. As they ran, the Taif fired a volley of arrows at them and killed one of them. 2 weeks passed and the end was not in sight. The Thaqif would not come out to fight. The Muslims could not get in to fight. Every time they approached the town, they were driven back with the arrows. One day Abu Sufyan also took part in a sally towards the town and stopped an arrow with his eye. He lived thereafter as a one-eyed man. February can be very cold in the region of Taif, and the weather during the siege was unpleasant. The Muslims tried to force the Thaqif out to give battle by destroying some vineyards near Taif, but the Thaqif refused to leave the security of their fort. Malik was much too clever a general to risk a battle under conditions which would favor his opponent. Finally, the Holy Prophet called a council of war and sought the advice of his officers. One of them said, "When you corner a fox in its hole, if you stay long enough you catch the fox, but if you leave the fox in its hole it does you no harm." Abu Bakr advised a return to Makkah, and Umar concurred with him. The Prophet could not wait indefinitely for the fall of Taif, as he had more important matters to attend to. He proposed that the siege be raised and the army return to Makkah, but some Muslim hotheads protested against this and insisted that they fight on until victory was gained. "Then you can attack tomorrow," said the Prophet. The next day a few of these battle-hungry Muslims again approached the fort with a view to capturing it, but were severely punished by the Thaqif archers. They returned in a more philosophical mood and agreed with the Prophet that it might be best to leave the fox in its hole. On February 23, 630, the 4th of Zulqa'dah 8 Hijri, the siege was raised. The Muslims had lost 12 men and a large number had been wounded. The Thaqif remained defiant. 10 months later, however, this tribe was to accept Islam and prove staunch in its faith. The Muslims arrived at Jirana on February 26, and here the Prophet distributed the spoils taken at Autas. To show the newly converted Meccans that there was no discrimination against them for having delayed their acceptance of the new faith, the Prophet also gave them a share of the spoils. But hardly had the women, children and animals been distributed among the Muslims, when a delegation of the Hawazin came to the Prophet and declared that the tribe had accepted Islam. "Will you not return to us what you captured from us in battle?" the delegates pleaded. Actually, they had no right to demand a return of what they had lost, because they had lost it as infidels and not as Muslims. But the Prophet was generous. "Are your women and children dearer to you or your property?" he asked them. "Return to us our women and children, and you can keep the rest," they replied. The Prophet now appealed to his army to return the women and children of the Hawazin. Every soldier responded to the Prophet's appeal and returned the captives in his hands, with the exception of Sufwan bin Umayyah, who refused to part with a girl who had been given to him as his share of the spoils. She must have been very beautiful. A few days later, Malik slipped out of Taif and came to the Muslim camp. He became a Muslim and was amply rewarded by the Prophet. It is a pity that this brilliant young soldier was given no important role in later Muslim campaigns, for he had the makings of a superb general. The Holy Prophet and the army of Islam now returned to Medina, arriving there in the later part of March 630. Thus ended the 8th year of the Hijrah. The year that followed was to become known as the Year of Delegations, for during this year most of the tribes of Arabia sent delegations to Medina and submitted to the Prophet. Not all the delegates or the tribal chiefs who sent them were motivated by a desire for the true religion, as we shall see later. While some were sincere seekers of the truth, others came for political reasons, some came out of sheer curiosity, and a few were downright scoundrels. End of chapter 9.